Welcome back to Charge, the podcast by Develop. My name is Louisa, and with me is my colleague Maria Christina.
Hi. So in this episode, we spoke to Meaghan Johnson from 11FS.
11FS is a global research and advisory firm helping companies understand the digital banking and FinTech worlds.
Meaghan is an expert in digital banking trends and developments. Her background is in mobile app practice and design. She's researched hundreds of banking apps.
We spoke to Meaghan about the banking battlefield here in the UK and the trends she's discovered through her research. Hi Meaghan.
Hello.
You were talking about the digital banking battlefield, Meaghan, and I was just wondering what you meant by that and how you sort of envision this space.
Yeah, it's quite interesting what's happening. I mean, if we look at the UK a few years ago, it was typically confined to the high street banks, sort of the challenger brands like Tesco and Virgin Money, and you had Metro Bank. Now we have, I think it's about 50 odd banks going for a banking license in the UK, which is a complete 180 from a few years ago. And we're seeing this within quite a few markets. And it's quite interesting because each market's quite different. And there's loads of things such as regulation and sort of the maturity of customers, which are driving to what extent there's like challenger brands within the different segments. But when we look at the digital banking battlefield, I think that the key issues with the traditional banks and the challenger banks is that the traditional banks have all the customers, but they don't have those truly digital intelligent services. Whereas if you look at the challenger the challenger banks, they have some really cool things in terms of digital, what they're trying to do, but sort of lacking that holistic customer base. And then sort of on the periphery, we have what we like to call the boogeymen, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Apples, huge marketing budget, huge R&D budget, loads of customers, and sort of it will be really interesting to see when they make a full play into the digital banking space.
Can you give us any examples of what are startup banks doing in the digital world that traditional banks aren't?
Yeah, I think that so within both types of banks, I think that obviously with PSD2 coming, sort of this push towards open banking, both of these types of banks need to use this to their advantage. And what we're seeing is that the challenger banks are sort of in a better position to use APIs and are sort of leaning more towards open banking. So what they're doing is partnering with FinTechs to expand their product and service offering. And I think that one of the strongest examples is from the German market. So we have N26. So they're a pan-European bank. I think they're in like 18 different countries. They, within Germany, partner with TransferWise, allowing the customers to send money abroad, but also partnering with another German fintech called Vamo, allowing customers to take out investment products. And then also Fidor, so Fidor is kind of split between the bank and the technology company, but looking at sort of the bank side of things, like the epitome of using open banking and APIs to offer their customers like anything you could imagine in terms of banking. So from like trading currency to Bitcoin trading to currency conversion, you name it, and Fidor customers can use it.
So you think that the power of partnerships is where the real strength lies of this new market?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, we've been sort of pushing that. I just wrote a newsletter talking about the power of partnerships, and specifically we were talking about ABN AMRO, so one of the largest Dutch banks. So they have invested in a Swedish firm called Tink. So Tink is like one of my favorite fintechs, and they provide really cool PFM solutions and account aggregation in Sweden. So they've now made a play into the Netherlands via ABN AMRO, and the partnership has seen a new app called Grip launch, where ABN customers can essentially, it's ABN branded, but it's powered by the Tink platform. So what's really cool about Tink is that it takes like a Facebook approach. So when you log into the app, you have like a timeline of all your recent transactions, and kind of when your salary gets paid in, that's like the biggest transaction that you've had and everything. Some really cool budgeting features. And also ABN partnering with MyTech, allowing their customers or potential customers to apply for an ABN account entirely within the mobile app. So MyTech is the vendor that provides the e-identification.
So what role do the customers play in these sort of evolutions? Because obviously by taking the high street the high street bank is a physical place where everyone can go to, whereas now we're talking about moving this all into a sort of abstract sphere. How do you think that's going to affect customers? How can these companies basically tailor their products to make customers more interested?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing more so, I mean, if you think about the UK market, I mean, initially it was kind of focused on Adam and Monzo and Starling, sort of like more of like a general sort of financial product with the current account. But now what we're seeing is a lot of new providers in the space focusing on a particular niche. So you have like Money's in the UK, which focuses solely on immigrants or expats looking to move to the UK. So essentially you can apply for an account within like 3 minutes and you get the sort code and account number, which just makes, I don't know if anyone has had the process of trying to open up a bank account having moved to the UK.
When you move as a student, it's very hard as well.
It's not fun. So they've done a good job of sort of capitalizing on that space. We've seen some initiatives within the SME space, so Coconut focusing on the freelancer market, so they're sort of in the process of acquiring their banking license, so they'll sort of be to the market soon. So I think that it's kind of just picking a particular niche and really going after that rather than trying to get like the entire slice of the pie with customers.
So that kind of swings back to the idea of partnerships, because you've got all these people doing these different niche things which you can then integrate into your platform.
Yeah, definitely.
And is this happening? Like, are you seeing any of the big banks sort of partnering up with fintechs or specific small products?
In some instances, I mean, what we see a lot of the big banks do obviously is host like investment and sort of having like accelerators and everything, and just being seen as kind of someone that's promoting and trying to push through the various fintechs and startups. Hello Bank in Belgium is doing a really good job of partnering with fintechs. So they've integrated, or not even fintechs, they've integrated the equivalent of Zopla within Belgium in their mortgage application, which is quite cool. It's a fantastic journey. And I think we're seeing, this week we saw Westpac launch a feature that's fueled by PayKey. So PayKey is an Israeli startup where they have a secure keyboard that's white labeled. So essentially Westpac customers, when they're in WhatsApp, Twitter, or Facebook, they can add this PayKey keyboard and then they can send money to everyone. So they're kind of putting the tech where the customer is in the social channels. So I know that they've also partnered with Sparebank1 in Norway. So that's kind of like a super exciting thing, I think, from like a complete different point of view within that technology within the keyboard.
Wow, that's very cool. So I think WeChat's doing the same thing in China, something along the same lines, integrating the payment solution straight into the chats that you use.
Yeah, so I've been lucky to like have a play with the WeChat wallet, and it's like one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. So yeah, it's imagine having like Facebook and WhatsApp in one platform to begin with, so sort of you don't need to toggle between the two, but then you have the wallet where you can then in like 1 or 2 clicks send money to anyone in your social network. So I mean in the UK, like if you want to set up a new pay, half the time you can't do it in the app, and you have to know the person's sort code, account number, but with WeChat Pay you can just pick a contact, send the money. And then they also integrate merchants and third-party providers. So also within the wallet, you can launch Didi, which is the Chinese equivalent of Uber, and book a taxi within the WeChat Pay wallet. And I mean, you can like look at public services. So if you need to book a hospital appointment and then pay for it, you can do that within the wallet. You can pay your utility bills, like anything you can possibly think of, you can do it from one app, which is just fantastic.
Interestingly, Barclays has had Ping It for so many years, and I've never heard of anyone using it.
Yeah, I mean, Ping It's an interesting one because it was brought out, I think, initially to acquire customers, to sort of encourage customers to switch to Barclays. But yeah, similarly, like I don't know anyone that uses Ping It, and I mean it's quite a nice app actually. They're doing some cool things. They have some nice international payment capabilities as well. I think it's just sort of a lack of education. So like when the banks launched Pay'em a few years ago, there was just not really like a big campaign, and I think the thing with Pay'in was that each bank could brand it differently. So with HSBC it'd be called Pay'in within the app, whereas Lloyd's it was called Pay Your Contacts. I mean, I remember I asked one of my friends to pay me back money for like a concert ticket, and he had NatWest, and he was like, okay, I haven't paid you before, I'm gonna have to wait until I go to the branch. And I was like, you don't have to go to the branch. In the app you can actually send up to £250 by just knowing my sort code and account number with any authentication. And he was like, I had absolutely no idea. So it's just, I think it's a lack of sort of education. But it's interesting when you see kind of like what Monzo has been doing and how they've really just focused on like getting a strong customer base within London, particularly kind of like in the Old Street, Shoreditch area, like people that really get it. And it's kind of, I feel like every time you go out around that area and you see someone pay with a card, it's always that Coral card. So they're doing quite a good job of like informing customers of like the changes and everything. Their Trello board's public and everything. So kind of I think like their inspiration in terms of how to keep customers engaged and using the app and making sure they can like utilize all the cool features that they have.
So it's also, here's also this sort of new marketing strategy where you basically convince one customer and then that customer goes on and tells 10 people and you pull them in that way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the whole thing with like some of the challenger banks like Monzo and Starling, like they're looking to become like a true marketplace. So in a sense, they're not like what they could be in a few years. It wouldn't even be considered what people typically view as a bank. It will be like a marketplace for other services. And there's a Dutch bank called Bank, which is a challenger bank, and they're 100% going in that bank as a marketplace model. They have some really cool things in the pipeline in terms of like integrating various services, and they like 100% do not see themselves as a bank whatsoever.
So can you actually explain that a little bit further? So what do you mean by it being a marketplace? How does that exactly change from a traditional bank as we know it?
Yeah, so I mean, if you think of like what you can do within your Barclays app, you can log in, you can add a new payee, you can pay off your loan, pay off your credit card, transfer money between accounts, buy travel insurance, and I think that that's pretty much about it. But sort of this idea of bank as a marketplace is being able to do things like purchase cinema tickets, and then within your app be able to see what film you're going to and then retrieve those actual tickets within your app, or being able to sort of avail of I don't know, your like if you wanted to do a utility comparison within the app, or the app actually telling you there's a cheaper deal for your electricity or something, and sort of allowing you to make that switch and everything within the app. So just thinking outside of like what you can traditionally do within a bank with traditional products. So it's kind of going along the lines of not just thinking about like a bank product like a current account, a credit card, a savings, but it's more like the customer's jobs to be done. So how do I have enough money at the end of the month? If my quarterly bill is a bit higher, how do I ensure that I'm able to pay that? How can I pay people like when I want to and wherever I want to?
That's really interesting. So we've had a look at how basically the fintechs are booming and what they're doing right, but what are the challenges that they're facing? What do you think are the main problems? Like the fact that it's such a heavily regulated market, is that going to be an issue for their growth? Are they ever going to be competitors to the big banks, to the traditional banks, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the number one issue is, or the number one challenge is that they just don't have the sheer customer base. And they're going to have to really differentiate to sort of get that right, or recognize that they're not going to go like head to head with Barclays in terms of like the sort of, they're not going to all of a sudden get all of like the Barclays customers or anything. So just kind of intelligently building a niche, and I think that like figuring out what they want to do and what they can do and doing it right, and using partnerships to sort of support the other aspects. And I think that like that's what banks, that's kind of a trap that banks have fallen into over like the past 20 odd years, is that they try to do too many things outside of like what banks should do, which is sort of keep people's money safe, facilitate payments, and lend money. So I think the challenges that succeed will focus on one or two things, build those up internally, and then look for partnerships to sort of like augment the other features.
What do you think about the regulations? Is that going to be an issue? Do you think the government is going to side with the traditional banks, so to speak, or do you think that the regulations will sort of fall in line with what these challenger banks are doing?
Well, I think that it varies between markets, but I mean, like looking at the UK, the regulators have been really sort of progressive with sort of opening up the market and allowing challenger banks to come to the market, and sort of even like the FCA offering like the sandboxes and everything is sort of a channel for fintechs and startups to kind of just like experiment and sort of succeed. And I think that they really do want sort of these startups and challenger banks to succeed. But it's quite interesting. We saw a few weeks ago that the sort of government has nominated RBS as kind of like the, I guess like the go-to traditional banks that challengers can sort of utilize, like for sort of support, and if the challengers need a branch presence, that they can go through RBS. So that's kind of a bit of a weird one. But yeah, I mean, I think that the regulator in the UK is super progressive, especially when you look at some other European markets. Like I know in, like if you look at Portugal and sort of some of the other European countries, you just don't see that kind of like challenger scene. I think you probably will start to see it in a few years, and I think that PSD2 will certainly kind of change things in the way traditional banks interact with fintechs, and kind of how the regulators look at sort of how the two can fit into like the banking space.
Okay, so sorry, just for our listeners, could you just tell me what PSD stands for, what it means?
So PSD2, it is essentially the Payment Services Directive, and essentially it basically facilitates open banking and the opening up of customer data.
Okay, and do you think open banking, how will it affect the traditional banking sector? Are they finding a space within it? Are they understanding how to use it? Or do you think it's just a fintech thing for now?
Yeah, well, it's some banks are sort of ahead of the game in terms of like a PSD2 strategy, already taking advantage of open banking. So for example, Hello Bank in Belgium already has some initiatives. Some of the banks in the UK, I think, are a bit far behind in terms of what they should be doing and what they want to do. But I mean, I think like the big thing is essentially with PSD2 is that like greater account aggregation is going to come to market. Sort of third parties will be able to access data. So for a bank, it's kind of like it completely changes how the customer can sort of interact with various different banks and players. And I mean, it's super interesting. I think a lot of people are kind of waiting and seeing what's going to happen, because it's just kind of, it's a big unknown. It's a huge sort of change in terms of what the banking industry has seen and experienced before. And I mean, I think that the opportunities, I think, are certainly going to benefit the customer. I think it's something that was sort of created with the customer in mind, and sort of if it plays out in the way that it should, customers will definitely benefit from it.
Do you have any examples of how open banking has been used successfully, or the idea of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to Hello Bank in France, so sort of what you see within like a typical mortgage application would be like a really old school form that's basically just like fill in all these different different bits of information in a poorly designed page and everything, and it's just like, okay, this is what you get. But what they've done again is, so they've integrated with that home finding company, so that like you can kind of just basically do everything that you need to within the application, and it's all powered by Hello Bank. So it kind of keeps the customer within the Hello Bank journey, shows that Hello Bank is sort of partnering with other providers that are key to finding a house and then taking out the mortgage application.
Okay, that's very interesting. So just to go back to sort of the traditional versus challenger sort of split, do you think, I was reading an article, I think it was by Chris Skinner, who was saying that actually we shouldn't be calling them challenger banks, we shouldn't be calling them disruptors, that's not what they are. Do you agree with that sort of idea? Do you think they're in a space where they're clashing, or do you think they're in a space where they're complementing each other?
So the challenger banks complementing each other?
No, the traditional banks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if anything, like all these challengers and fintechs coming to market has caused banks to wake up. But I mean, at the end of the day, like, and I mean, I'd like to say it's not an excuse, but banks are tied down by legacy systems and sort of the environment. And I mean, just the sheer fact that you look at some of the digital teams within the UK banks and there's like 1,000 people, and it's kind of like, how do you get things done quickly? And I mean, a lot of the banks are moving towards a more agile work process, but then you look at like Monzo, there's like 60 people there, and if you want something done, you can kind of like do it a lot quicker. You don't have that sort of like bureaucracy and everything. So, I mean, it's certainly caused banks to start thinking about things and start implementing things. But yeah, I mean, I think that in the UK it's just super interesting because, like, I think Adam was the first of like the main challenger banks to get their banking license, and they've had a lot of investment. They've raised a lot of funds, but I think in terms of actually acquiring customers, it hasn't been at the rate I think they were expecting. Like initially, kind of, I think only 5% of the people that sort of expressed interest in Adam actually went ahead and applied for the savings account in the first few months when they were offering the savings account. But I think that, yeah, we'll just have to wait to see with like Monzo and Tandem and Starling what happens once they actually roll out with their current accounts.
Why do you think it's the case for Atom?
So within the industry, there was a lot of hype around Atom and everything, and they kind of took a different approach to what we've seen with Monzo. So Monzo's been really transparent in terms of their development, like getting customers on board, running their alpha and their beta programs, and just being super public. And I think that in focusing on kind of like the London area, so as such, kind of like, you know, they have a huge waiting list to get a Monzo card. They've done a great job of sort of spreading the word, getting customers excited, and I know that sort of once they launch their current account, there's going to be loads of people applying. And I mean, even like they recently just opened up, I think with like Monzo customers could invest within Monzo, and I think it was up to like £4 million, and there was like so many people applied for it, and I did, and I didn't get through, and I was just like, oh, I want to get through so bad. But I mean, it's great that they've just been super public. And Adam, on the other hand, was like really secretive, not really going out and just taking that same approach in terms of showing what they're doing, keeping like customers up to date, and just trying to get this sort of like community. So I think for me that's the difference. Like I sort of, at one point I asked my friends, I was like, oh, have you heard of Monzo? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, have you heard of Adam? And they're like, what's Adam? And I'm just like, okay, this kind of summarizes it.
We're big Monzo fans in this office as well.
I think we're all Monzo supporters.
Everyone loves Monzo.
I think what's so great about their transparent approach is that they make you trust them, which, as we were saying earlier, is a concern with new banks.
Yeah.
That it's not easy to trust them, but Monzo are transparent.
Yeah, and they're sort of like, even a few weeks ago when they had the issue with, I think it's FIS, their payment processor, when customers couldn't use the card, like within a few hours customers were getting notifications from the Monzo team saying, we know this is happening, we're trying to fix it. And then the next day, like another message came through, them apologizing, explaining what happened and everything, a link to kind of like their service notification feature, which customers could then opt into and everything. And I mean, like when RBS and Lloyds and Barclays, when they have an outage, it's like you get an email from them like a week later being like, oh, we know this happened and we apologize, and you're like, okay, this is so like impersonal and everything. So yeah, I think it's going back to that kind of idea of transparency, so sort of the fees and sort of showing where they're going, everything. And I think that that's really key to sort of getting customers on board, and then potentially translating into converting customers that may be a bit wary in terms of security, onto sort of like getting over their fears about security with the new guys.
So are these the things that the big banks should be learning? Being agile, being communicative, being transparent? Are those sort of the key pillars that these new disruptors are sort of creating?
Yeah, no, 100% that. And also I think thinking about customers' jobs to be done and not the products. So not thinking about, oh, I'm on the current account team, I'm on the loans team, I'm on the mortgage team. I'm on the how do I ensure a customer has enough money to spend? How do I ensure that the customer is doing what they can to save more, putting their money in the right types of savings account? How do I make sure the customer has a holistic experience in terms of finding a house, applying for their first time mortgage, etc.
Do you think Monzo will be, and Atom will be moving towards those spaces as well, the sort of mortgage loans, or do you think they'll leave it to the big banks?
I think Atom, I'm not sure if it's in the retail space, but I think they are entering the mortgage space, perhaps. I think more like lending within the corporate segment, but yeah, it'll be interesting. I think that perhaps if they do, it'll be more via a marketplace approach or partnering with somebody rather than trying to just offer everything by themselves.
So basically, it's a very exciting space right now. So many things seem to be changing.
Yeah, and even just looking to other markets as well. There's just so much happening. So N26 is in 18 countries. Bunk. Initially just in the Netherlands, announced that they're entering the German market, and yeah, I feel every week there's a new challenger bank or FinTech or something popping up in a European market, and then also looking at there's some cool things happening in Asia and the States as well. So yeah, I think just globally a super exciting time.
So what do you think the future holds? What's your sort of prediction? Which way are we going? What's going to be the next exciting thing to come out of this?
I think the challenger banks that are leaning more towards bank as a marketplace, I think that's truly going to change the way that people think of the word bank and how they actually bank. And I think that, that's just, it's going to benefit the customer. So I'm quite excited to see what those guys do. And as a Monzo customer, super pumped to see a year down the line, 2 years down the line, how it's sort of not just helping me, have a place where I can put my money and have a card to facilitate payments, but what else they sort of do outside of the typical or standard financial service space.
And what about the battlefield? What's your prediction on there?
If I knew the answer, I would probably be a millionaire.
Please keep this.
No, I think that, what we're seeing with some of the challenger banks is it happened with Meaghan in the States. So Meaghan came out as a challenger bank maybe 4 years ago, and now they're moving more towards a technology company. So they're actually white labeling their PFM solution and selling it to the likes of TD in Canada, Westpac in New Zealand. Fedor also as well, sort of focusing quite a lot on the tech side of the business. So I think that there's a lot of new challenger banks. I don't think that all of them will essentially make it. I think if they don't, they'll either be acquired or branch off into sort of just essentially being a tech provider. So I think that will happen from that point of view, and I think, the big banks are always going to be there, and it will just be a matter of do they partner more with fintechs and the challenger brands, or do they kind of continue doing what they're doing and try to go at it alone?
Well, that's about all we have time for today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That marks the end of episode 2 of Charge.
Thank you to Meaghan from 11FS, and thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it.
We wanted to thank everyone for their comments and reviews. Please keep them coming.
If you have an interesting perspective on the worlds of fintech or cybersecurity, do get in touch to feature in a future episode.
Our email is charge@develop.co.uk.
Subscribe to Charge to be notified when our next episode is released.
Next time, we will be speaking to Eric Abrahamson from Digital Fine Print about what happens when insurance meets social media.
See you next time.